In my very young days, I spent some summers on a racehorse training farm, more or less galloping racehorses. But you don't learn to ride galloping racehorses, you learn to survive. But I went to Michigan State College in East Lansing, Michigan, and at that time the land-grant colleges had ROTC of horse cavalry, and they had a detachment of horses and soldiers there, and we were taught to ride military style, which was based on European background, and we were taught to play polo, to jump horses. We went to horse shows, we played indoor polo, we played outdoor polo. We went to the other land-grant colleges like Iowa and Indiana and Ohio, and we went to horse shows in Detroit and Jackson, Michigan, and had a very full-rounded education in riding, which started me out.
Military leader, sportsman, visionary, Olympian. Major General Jonathan R. Burton has led an extraordinary and noteworthy life. Jack Burton is truly a legend in the horse world, having played a key role in the development of American equestrian sports in the post-World War II era. A former cavalry officer who served in both World War II and in Vietnam, General Burton represented America in numerous national and international equestrian competitions, including the 1948 and 1956 Olympic Games. An international judge and technical delegate in 3 equestrian disciplines, General Burton served as Vice President of the United States Equestrian Team and as President of the United States Combined Training Association. General Burton was interviewed for this program by 3-time Olympian Jimmy Wofford and by HorsesDaily.com's Mary Phelps.
I graduated on the 16th of June in '42, and the 20th of June I was at Fort Riley, Kansas. And I was sent to the basic course at Fort Riley, which taught horsemanship, and it taught how to conduct, to run stables, how to do marching with horses, how to do bivouacs, how to map reading, and it was a full education. Also had all kinds of weapons, and we had to shoot the weapons and take them apart. But the basic horsemanship was taught there, which was a continuation of what I'd already had at the ROTC. Then I was shipped down to the border and in Mexico, and went to the 7th Cavalry, which was stationed in El Paso, and they shipped me further out to the Mexican border, and I was running a platoon along the Mexican border at Ojinaga, and the war had started on the December 7th, '41, and we were patrolling 200 miles of the border, and we were looking for enemy saboteurs and spies, but mainly we found antelope and rattlesnakes. And the colonel came by to inspect me, and he said, "I hear you play polo." And he said, "Yes, I had a little experience." So he said, "You're coming in to run the polo stable and the remount stable." So I was shipped back to Fort Bliss, and I ran the remounts, which remounts mean training horses. And I had to run the polo. There was polo twice a week, Wednesdays and Sundays. And on Saturday they had horse shows, and also on Sunday we had fox hunts. So it was a pretty all-rounded equitation experience.
You know, General Burton, being from the beginning of it, you know, any sport, any person, you really don't, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. And you think about somebody like a General Burton who has had that tremendous influence and solving the problems that he had to solve, and being a diplomat at times, being, you know, having a stick in his hand to make sure that things happen at times, you know, being a general at times. And he, it's really important, I think, for everybody, to the young riders that are coming up, the kids that are coming up, because you don't get that feeling now because he's not as involved in the direct organization. He's doing more of the official stuff. That it's really important for people to realize the magnitude of the problems that he had to solve in order to make this sport, and what are the benefits of it. We get to run now at an event every weekend here in the United States. You know, there's 270 events, I think, here in the United States. When he started, there would have been 3, and most of them at the Army bases. And so you think about, in his lifetime, to watch that whole thing grow, and he was the seed that created that. That is the big thing I think you want the kids to realize and the young riders to realize, that the ground, that the footsteps that they're following are the footsteps of somebody that's a giant. I mean, they're just a pure giant. And we feel like when we put our footsteps in where he's trod, and our feet are about this big, and his feet are about that big. And, you know, it's an honor to be even a part of a sport that's associated with him, when you get great minds like that be able to work the things that they've worked.
Jack is just such an integral part of our sport, the 3-day event that my wife and I spend more time with. His knowledge of the sport and just his understanding of the riders and his encouragement that he gives to riders and organizers is just far and above what we expect from our officials as a rule. He's just such a great man. He's a mentor, and we all look up to him.
With his military background and all the competitions he does, there's one thing that he's always said: if there's a bathroom, use it, and if there's food, eat it.
The 1st Cavalry Division, when I was in it, was horse cavalry. We were guarding the border because the war had started on December 7th, and this 41, and the Australians had sent their infantry in 1939 to the Far East to support the British. They had 4 infantry divisions, so they had no infantry divisions in Australia. The Japanese were in New Guinea, which is just north of Australia, and actually Australian territory, and they were bombing Darwin and Townsville and Brisbane, and they said, we need infantry. So they shipped the 1st Cavalry Division without horses, 5,000 troops on a Matson liner, and we went directly zigzagging with no escort, and went to Brisbane and landed on the Brisbane River, and we went into a tent camp. We were there about 3 days, and the regimental commander called me in and said, we need somebody to go to a chemical warfare school in Brisbane, and you've volunteered. So I went to downtown to Brisbane to stay at a school there, and the first night we went to the Lennon Hotel, which is where MacArthur stayed. I guess it's the best hotel in Brisbane. And I was having dinner at the hotel, and this blonde was in a couple tables away having dinner with an Air Force captain. And so I kind of talked to her a little, and then we went to the Officers Club, which was on Queen Street, which in wartime had Marines and Army and Navy and all the people that are around a war, and it was a vibrant place, and she was there dancing with this captain, so I danced with her, and we got the number, and things got going from there. We've been married 61 years.
Now, I traveled events all over the country and in some ways all over the world, and I can't keep up with General Burton. General Burton is in his kind of early 80s, and I'm in my early 40s, and I still can't keep up with him. I mean, he is tireless. I think, he's always been a kind of a fitness person, and I know that anybody that ever stays with him has to put up with all the push-ups and the sit-ups and all that kind of stuff that he does every morning. But he has just been tireless through the years, and he's everywhere. He goes to all events, and it's been the horses and the events have been so much part of his life that I don't see an end to it. I mean, he just keeps going, and we all love having him around. As soon as General Burton's there, you always have kind of a sense of comfort around that the event's going to be okay. Besides, as long as I don't try to walk the course with him because I can't keep up with him, he has been, he's just kind of a great comfort to have at every event and such a joy to have around.
We went down there on Matson liners, 5,000 soldiers per Matson liner. We went into bivouac in an ironwood forest in Australia with the wallabies and the kangaroos. And the wallabies used to run down through the tents and knock all the tents down. And we trained there for a while, and then we went to New Guinea and finished that up, and then we went to the Admiralty Islands, which were north of New Guinea, and became the naval base for the invasion of the Philippines. And we were in on the invasion of the Philippines. On the right flank, there were 4 divisions, and the 1st Cavalry Division was on the right. And we took the capital, Tacloban, and then we were shipped up into Luzon, the main island, and we led the attack on Manila. And then we were practicing to land in Japan, but they hit it with the atomic bomb, and we went up there to occupy. I had enough points to come home. So I came home and came back to Fort Riley, and they reformed the Army Olympic team, and I was lucky enough to get onto that for the 48 games. A group of officers, experienced officers, who were assigned on a permanent basis to the Army Olympic team. And they were based mainly some of the old-timers that had experience and a few newcomers, which I was one of them. And the most senior officer was put in command, and that was Colonel Earl Thompson, who had won a silver medal in 1932 and 1936. 32 was Los Angeles, 36 was Berlin, and he'd ridden the horse Jenny Camp by Gordon Russell in both of those games. So he was, of course, an outstanding horseman, and he was in charge, and he made the decision. And the horses that were available were all Army horses, and they were the most experienced horses. Since the Army had 14 regiments of cavalry, when you have that number of horses, you get some good horses coming to the top. And the best horses came to the team and were available to Colonel Thompson to use. And we shipped them then by boat to Antwerp, and then by train out to Munich, and we trained at the Munich racetrack. They needed a team. Eisenhower said, we still have a team, we still have the horses, we'll send the team, and he funded it. And we were able to go on Liberty ships with the horses, and we took them over, and we established a training camp in Munich at the old SS stables, and we also had access to the Germans. The Germans had captured thousands of horses, and they were up at Donaueschingen on the Danube, and there were thousands of horses there, and some of the horses were on their Olympic team. Some of their dressage horses were in there, and some of their jumpers were in there, and we latched on to some of these good horses and used some of them in the 1948 games.
After the 1948 Olympics, in 1949, Truman mechanized the Army, which meant there was no more cavalry. What was the evolution now over the next 4 years from an entirely military setup to the setup that we then had in Helsinki in 1952?
Well, Eisenhower, being the Chief of Staff of the Army, said, we no longer will support the Army Olympic team, and it ceased. And then a group of people got together. Chip Wofford was the commander, a retired colonel, and they organized with a group of other people, Whitney Stone and others, mainly to get teams together to represent the country in the Madison Square Garden and at the Royal Winter Fair. And they were successful in organizing teams, and then it came up that we needed to send an Olympic team to the Helsinki Games in 1952. And again, funds were raised and teams were formed and they were shipped over. And the first equestrian team was in 1952 was civilian. And it was from then on that the USET ran the Olympic participation in the Equestrian Olympics.
Well, firstly, Jack Burton is a super nice guy. I've known him forever. He was a Fort Riley man. I was taught by other Fort Riley men, Billy Steinkraus, Gordon Wright, Cappy Smith. He was of that school. That was a great school of horsemanship, Fort Riley, one of the best in the history of equitation. And he came out of that school and always was very supportive of the fledgling USCT in 1950. He just has been a great supporter as a teacher, as a rider in the early days, as a judge. He became very, very focused on dressage. Vending, of course, I think might have been his pet, but he was also very supportive as us on the equestrian team for the show jumping. But he is a prince of a person, just a super person.
In 1946, we went to Germany, and we took over the German war efforts and their materiel and their bases and depots that were military oriented. One of the depots at Donauwörth on the Danube was an enormous remount station where they had, they used the horses for draft to haul their logistics during the war, and they had lots of horses to pulling these columns, and they also had, they didn't have horse cavalry as such, but they used them mainly in a logistical manner. But they also captured other countries' horses. They had French horses, they had Yugoslav horses and Polish horses, and there was maybe 1,500 horses in this station, and many of them were captured, and many of them were German horses. Now, some of these horses, for instance, their best dressage trainer was a fellow named Lorky, and some of his horses were in this remount station that they had gathered together because they needed horse flesh. And so we knew about these horses, so we picked up these horses and we used them on our team. The same was true of jumpers. They had some good jumpers, and we picked those up, and we used some of them on our team, so they were available to, they call that captured enemy materiel. Well, see, we were occupiers. We took over their remount station. There was no negotiations. We just owned the horse. That's captured enemy materiel. It wasn't as things progressed, and when the Marshall Plan started and things like that, they wanted to rehabilitate the German economy, that those horses were then went back to the Germans, and they were used in their agriculture and used as necessary. So it was only in the initial stages that we just did what we wanted to do because it was captured enemy material. If you capture an ammunition dump, you can use their ammunition, and it's yours. So that was the initial situation. As things progressed, we got out of it, and the rehabilitation took over the use of those horses and dispersed them.
I think Jack Burton will probably be remembered as a wonderful all-around horseman and probably the fittest 80-some-year-old cranberry juicing man that I know.
An interesting incident happened when we were jumping over there. They had inter-service competitions. We were in the French zone at a horse show. The French were running it, and see, there was American zones, British zones, French zones, and Russian zones. So I was jumping this horse. He was a nice little cob kind of a horse with a docked tail, and he could jump well. His name was Nipper. And I was about to go in the ring, and a Frenchman came running up and said, "Do you have my horse?" And we did have his horse because the Germans had taken it from him. And of course, we'd taken it from the Germans. And so I was using it to jump, and he wanted his horse back right then. And I said, "Well, Uncle Sam owns this horse now." We'd put the brand on the horse, our Army brand. They called it a Preston brand. So it was government materiel. And I wasn't able to give government materiel to this Frenchman, even though he was very excited, and it actually was his horse. Aachen, of course, is the show. Big jumps, big crowds, 40, 50,000 every day. This is a horse named Denver, Army, $165 horse, purchased by the quartermaster. Horse could jump high, very high. We used him mainly in high jumping classes. I jumped him at Aachen, I think we went in the Springer and ended up at 2 meters at 6'6". And Springer is where you have 6 fences in a row, each at a different at the same distance apart. And I tied with Brinkman, who was the leading German rider at the time. He threw a shoe. And so all I had to do is, as they raised the jump, is go in and just even refuse or jump the course, and I would win. But see, he couldn't jump. So I said, this was just after wartime, and the Germans were, the town of Aachen was leveled almost, and the people were in terrible shape, but they still came to the horse show. And so I said, let's be tie. And we'll be both equal. And so the two of us, Denver and Brinkman, and I rode around the ring, and these 40,000 Germans went crazy because they got the blue ribbon too. And it was a very good diplomatic idea to do that. And this Denver horse was mainly single fences up and down. He could jump high, but if you got a little width to him, or he'd plow into him. Gustav Rau was director of equestrian activities in Germany, had been for many years, was highly respected, and he was a well-trained man that was good with people. And he ran the shows. If you wanted to have a show, you had to outline what you wanted, and he would advise you what classes you were to have and how they should be run. In other words, he ran equestrian activities in Germany. And of course, he was influential in organizing their teams, and he was handled the money factor, and they had national support and they had support from the riding community, so he had to balance all that together, which he did very well. But what was most important was he was respected, and he wasn't political, and everybody liked him and did what he said. Usually in horse circles, there's one side and there's another side, as we're very well aware of in this country, and they didn't have that there, so everything worked as a program that he directed. So he was a magnificent fellow, and the other people, other countries in Germany, like the French were there and the English were there and we were there, respected him and listened to him because he was running the shows and we all liked what he was doing. Jip Wofford was taking over. The USET was going to start, and they wanted to form a team to go to Helsinki, which was 1952. And he, being a retired Army man, having been an Olympic rider, thought that perhaps we had some of the horses that we had would be useful for him to use to go to the 1952 games. So he got in touch with the War Department, and they said Wofford wants any horses that we can send back that he could possibly use. And we had some good ones. Democrat, for instance, was a marvelous horse, an Army-bred horse. So I was ordered to, I was always the junior officer on the team, so I made the trips, and the trips were always by rail to the port and in a freight train, and then we would load the horses, we'd lift a stall-like thing over the side and put them down into the hatch, and they'd arrange the stalls around the hatches, and we had a track around the inside of the stall so we could exercise the horse. So we'd load the horses on about the second deck down, and put them in the stalls, and then we'd start out. It would take about 10 to 12 days in old Liberty ships to get back to the States. So we brought the horses back. Actually, we had pretty good weather. I had a few soldiers with me grooming and taking care of the horses, and the horses ate well and didn't get sick, and actually they came off feeling very good. So we unloaded at Bayonne in New Jersey, and we then put the horses on rail cars, but we used baggage cars because we shipped ordinary horses. We'd ship 25 horses in a freight car, all loose. But when we shipped the Army team horses, we had baggage cars that were specifically fixed for horses. And they were 3 abreast, and there were several rows of 3 abreast. And we hooked onto the passenger trains, so they hauled us very quickly on passenger trains with these baggage cars. And we went out to Fort Riley, Kansas, and we unloaded them and gave them to Jip Wofford, and he used some of them in the Helsinki Games. Nashville, Tennessee was the rebirth of the start of horse trials in the United States. There were no horse trials in the 40s and the 50s. The only horse trial or event in the United States was every year the Army put one on, more or less as a graduation for their advanced class. They put on a full 3-day of Olympic level event at Fort Riley. But nowhere else in the country was there even a horse trial. So I was doing some teaching. I was stationed in Fort Knox, and I was doing some teaching in Nashville, and the gal that ran the horse column for the Nashville, Tennessee, Margaret Lindsay Warden, who is 100 years old and still alive, suggested that we start a miniature event. So I wrote the rules, designed the course, helped build the course, and we had the first horse trial back in the 50s and started eventing in the United States. And I also wrote in it as a kind of, and they gave me the blue ribbon because I did very well. But I shouldn't have written it since I designed the course and wrote the rules, but we needed participants. There weren't too many.
My name is Sally Ike, and I've known Jack Burton since probably the early 70s. I was on an eventing squad when Jack Legoff first came to the United States, and General Burton had a brown thoroughbred horse. My memory is he was a thoroughbred called Bold Lure, and I was given the ride on him, and he was rather hot, and Jack had taught him all of these what I thought were rather fancy dressage moves like flying change and things like that. And I can remember my legs were always in the wrong place, and I was always giving him the wrong signal. There was a lot of counter-canter in the test at the time, and I could never do it right because General Jack had trained him so well that if I didn't give the right aids, he wouldn't stay on the counter-canter, and I'd always get a flying change by mistake.
Now, were you involved in the Olympic team in 1952, or did that come later?
No, in '52. See, I had a military occupational specialty, MOS, of horse cavalryman, and there was no horse cavalry, so I had no legitimate reason to be in the Army. So I had to go to the Fort Knox, to the armored school, to get an MOS. So I was unavailable to go to the '52 games, but I got my MOS by graduating from the armored school, and then I was available to go to the '56 games.
And you rode in Stockholm in 1956.
In '56, again, this was with the United States Equestrian Team.
On the eventing team, did you ride as a military officer or as in civilian dress?
I rode in the military uniform, which at that time was the prevalent in most of the European team were military officers. The '56 Stockholm Olympics in Sweden, and I think what you should note there is the flimsiness of the fences compared with the big logs and the decorations and the massiveness that you see in the cross-country fences now. But that was a very typical fence.
Do you remember the horse that you were riding?
Yes, it was not my horse. The horse was named Huntington. I had, my horse went lame that I had, and then there's another situation. We didn't have many horses. Now they have, most riders have more than one horse of Olympic caliber. In those days we were lucky to have one. And this was Walter Staley's horse that was brought over as a spare horse, and it was a good horse and got me around. It fell on the 13th fence, which was a big, wide oxer, and the horse fell and broke the reins. I tied the reins together, we went on, and it fell on the last fence, which was 33rd fence, which was an 11-foot drop, which was too much drop, and the horse was exhausted, and he went straight down, and I went straight down with him. And they've changed the rule now that after that event that the drop could only be 2 meters. That's 6'6", and they were 11-foot drop there. So the horse fell twice, and nowadays that would be elimination. But at that event, you had to go on 3,000 meter in phase E, and the owner of the horse, Walter Staley, was there, and he saw that I was out, so he threw me on the horse. They had a fence for the 3,000 meters, so the whole horse galloped the 3,000 meters. At the other end, the attendants there saw that I was not with it, so they put me in the ambulance and sent me to the hospital, and I had a concussion.
I was judging with Jack a few years ago, and we were staying at a little bed and breakfast, and he'd been out swimming early in the morning like he always likes to do, and he came in for breakfast and he had his cranberry juice, and I was sitting there eating my pancakes and waffles and everything, I think, and I said, "Jack, I just hope when I'm your age I'm in as good a shape as you." He said, "Son, you ain't in as good a shape as me now. There's no hope for you."
With various changes in station and various wars to go to, I would take part in the horse activities as that were offered in the area that I was concerned. And this would consist of playing polo in Fort Bliss, to working in horse shows and steeplechasing at Fort Knox, and fox hunting at Fort Leavenworth and at Fort Riley. So it was catch as cat can after 1956.
The 1950s was a productive decade for General Burton's equestrian career, for it was in that decade that he helped to launch modern-day eventing in the United States, and he competed in his second and final Olympic Games. But in the following decade, General Burton's focus shifted back to his military career, as involvement in Southeast Asia grew. With the advent of the Vietnam conflict, he was again called upon to serve his country in battle overseas. During the 1970s, he served as commander of the Army's 3rd Armored Division, and briefly as the acting commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, the largest division of the United States Army.
Well, 3rd Armor, I finished a 3-year tour. The normal tour for a division commander was 18 months, and Abrams left me in there for 3 years. At the end of 3 years, I had 33 years in the Army. The normal tour, you retire, is 30 years. I had 33, so I decided I'd get out, and was offered the opportunity of executive director of the United States Equestrian Team. So I went to the U.S. Equestrian Team for 10 years.
How did you get involved in, Jack, the same kind of a question? How did you get involved now in judging? Because you wound up judging the World Championships and the Olympic Games. You must have gotten a start judging somehow.
Well, I got a ticket in 1958, I think, and I also got an international ticket at the same time. And I was thus able to judge hunters and jumpers, and eventing didn't even have tickets in those days. They just asked people to judge. But they eventually got eventing judges, and they always had jumper judges. And I also had an FEI card because I had international experience, and I had an FEI card in dressage and eventing and jumping. And that took me to Europe, and I judged in Germany and Holland and England and and in France and Italy, and I went to Australia and New Zealand, and I've been down into Brazil and Central American countries, so it led to a whole nother existence of judging both internationally and nationally.
Major General Jonathan R. Burton has earned a place in history, both for his military service and for his service to the equestrian community. Carrying forward the legacy of the Army's legendary cavalry school at Fort Riley, Kansas, he is among those military officers who became the bridge by which equestrian competition moved from a military-only sport into the modern-day era of open civilian competition. Between 1912 and 1948, the U.S. Army Equestrian Team was also the U.S. Olympic Team. Although these teams were pulled from an elite officer corps in a then still racially segregated army, the contributions of these outstanding horsemen and others whose rank or race prevented their participation in the international arena remain both relevant and significant. With the phasing out of the cavalry, General Burton and other veterans of the Army Equestrian Team led the establishment of the United States Equestrian Team, the USET, and played a key role in the development of the competitions, training programs, and organizations that have shaped the face of modern show jumping, eventing, and dressage, more than a half-century after the mounted cavalry was phased out. General Burton's military career included distinguished service during World War II and the Vietnam War. His equestrian achievements include participation in 2 Olympic Games and a career as an international judge and steward. His legacy also includes leading roles in the development of modern-day eventing in the U.S., and with his close friend Jack Fritz and others, in the development of the prestigious North American Junior and Young Rider Championships.
For those of you who have not come across General Burton and Jack Fritz, General Burton and Jack Fritz General Burton and Jack Fritz, along with Colonel Donald Thackeray, were the inspiration and the founding fathers of the North American Young Riders Championships. So without them, this competition wouldn't have gone on for the last 20+ years. So congratulations and thank you to both of you for creating such an extraordinary competition.
The American equestrian community owes a deep debt of gratitude to General Burton, who has dedicated his life to serving his country both on the battlefield and in many facets of American horse sport.
It comes down to support. Like when we had the military, we formed this team, and the military supported all our movements and provided us with the very best horses that we could have. Now suddenly the civilians are going to provide the team. So you're going from scratch. You have nobody with. We didn't have eventing at all in the country, so we had to start with the small events and gradually build up and use horses that were made excess by the Army, and a lot of, you saw in the old days, a lot of competitions, the horses had neck brands on them, Army neck brands, the Preston brands. So you're going from scratch, from both ability from horses and from riders, and it's been a slow thing to progress up to where we are now. But now you see the quality of the horses are fantastic now compared with the old days. You see dressage horses that cost $1 million. Well, you couldn't even think about that in the old days. You see jumping horses approaching $1 million. 3-day horses are not that expensive, but the support that to provide the horses now is fantastic compared with our time. The ability problem of people to ride the horses, we've partially succeeded in developing trainers that come over here from Germany that are training our dressage people, and we are using some with people with German backgrounds, especially in dressage, on our team. In the 3-day, we've been more or less on our own, and we have developed the ability just through, as things progressed, the events got better. We ended up with Rolex, which is a very fine world-class event, and but it came slowly. But it was a kind of a natural thing for us to do and train on our own, and because it really is a kind of a natural, more natural thing than the specialty of dressage. The show jumping was, in the old days, was very elementary. For instance, the class, a normal class at an ordinary horse show was 4 posts and rails, and you jumped around twice. And on the rails, they put little slits that fell off if you touched it. And that was the extent of the jumping. The courses that you see now with in and outs and spreads and verticals and things like that were gradually developed, were non-existent back in the 40s and the 50s. So our jumping has progressed by imitating what we had in Europe. Now in the military, we had more or less the international type courses. As a matter of fact, at Fort Riley, we could duplicate any European course. We had a big hippodrome, we had the banks, we had the ditches, and we had the facilities to develop a course of Lucerne or of Dublin or Geneva right there. But that was only in-house. We didn't have that in the country. But as things got better, and we saw that what we had to do to compete, the courses developed, and now we're at where we are now, and our courses are on a parallel with the European courses. As that developed, of course, we get better and better internationally. Trying to go to government support in this country, I think, is a pretty big sponsorship. Rolex is a perfect example of sponsorship that's useful, that works. Of course, we need more Rolexes support like that, and that can build up and continually build up. Like Rolex been with them how many years? 20 years or something. Well, that kind of support for eventing has been terrific. Now we need more of that type support for both jumpers and for dressage, and I'd like to see it coming.
One of my major stories about him is how he helped me when I was a young rider. When I was 19 or 20 years old, I went up to Gladstone, New Jersey, just got picked for the team, really excited to be out there, but don't have 2 cents to rub together. And needed some type of transportation, and ended up buying a car, but couldn't really get a loan without somebody local being able to sponsor me. And Gladstone, I was talking about it, didn't know what to do, not at Gladstone, in South Hamilton, Massachusetts, and didn't know how I was going to do it and all that kind of stuff. And General Burton stepped up to the plate right there and said, well, I'll co-sign a loan for you. So General Burton co-signed a loan for me in my first car that I'd ever owned when I was 19 years old and just gone up to South Hamilton. And he has been, a friend of mine. He has been a mentor of mine. And probably one of the best things is you don't ever get to be around legends, that many legends in your life. And General Burton is a legend in every aspect, from everything that he's done in the Army, from everything that he's done to start equestrian sport here, for everything he's done for the sport of eventing by itself. competing in Olympics, judging there. It's been an amazing, amazing lifetime, and I feel unbelievably privileged that I was around to know him in so many parts of his career, and his influence on me has just been absolutely tremendous.
Thank you.